Welcome to Breakfast with Brodies. This is a programme specifically for NQ lawyers, designed by lawyers from Brodies, free to attend for any NQs or trainees, with support from the Law Society, and you can find more about the programme by visiting our website at brodies.com. My name is Joyce Cullen. I'm a partner at Brodies in our commercial litigation disputes, business disputes team. I've been with Brodies for most of my career, so I can just about remember what life was like as an NQ. I'm delighted to welcome with us this morning Donald Macdonald, who is General Counsel with the Royal Bank of Scotland, NatWest, in personal banking and services there within the legal governance and regulatory affairs team. And Donald is going to give us his insights into expectations from a General Counsel, which is the subject of today's breakfast briefing. Donald will tell you a bit more about his wider role and particularly his connection with younger and less qualified solicitors. Donald is also our relationship partner with Brodies, and I am the relationship partner with the bank. So it's going to be a very useful session for me too, in that we can all learn from Donald about what's expected by a GC, and particularly in these interesting times, if we can say it. As I said, we hope to have a fairly informal conversation. Donald was suggesting it would be like Newsnight, but I'm not promising that. But we'll be exploring a variety of topics, which we hope will be of relevance to you as newly qualified. And we thought we'd start, Donald, perhaps you can introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself. But the first topic we're going to cover is talking about delivery standards and maintaining those standards during the current crisis in COVID-19. So, Donald, what do you say about that?
Thank you, Joyce, and good morning, everyone. First of all, as Joyce said, I'm Donald Macdonald. I've been working at RBS now for nearly 30 years, so I've always been in-house. I trained with the bank, so in some ways I'm quite a long way from newly qualified and trainees, but in other ways I'm actually reasonably close. And I say that because, as well as my sort of legal obligations within the function, I'm responsible for all the people issues around the legal and regulatory function in the bank, which is RBS NatWest across the UK. And I sort of lead and sponsor our training programme. So I take personal responsibility for all our trainees in Scotland, and with one of my colleagues, I oversee the process and participate in all the interviews for our trainees and development of our newly qualified in England and Wales. Obviously, I can't take direct responsibility there as I have a Scottish practicing certificate. But I also look after the training and development and programmes that we run for all our staff, all our lawyers, and non-lawyers actually, to quite a big body of non-lawyers in the function, particularly investigators. So I have a keen interest in a lot of these people issues. And just other background, Joyce sort of gave you my title. Personal banking is really the main part of my role. So I support or look after and manage the legal teams that support basically retail banking, high street banking, not corporate commercial banking, and also services, which is really around outsourcing technology, intellectual property, and the teams that support a lot of the back office activities, supply chain contracts, and all that type of stuff that goes on in the bank. So that's probably more than enough about me. Are you happy for me to launch into your first question, Joyce?
Yes. So what's happening so far as the bank and its customers are concerned, perhaps as a result of the working from home regime?
So I think maybe start just talking about COVID generally. And I think, so looking back sort of 10, 12 weeks in, there's been a lot of lessons learned. And the first one I would point to is the importance of planning, contingency planning, and scenario planning. So we had actually, as a bank, run some scenario plans internally on a desktop basis as to how we would react to significant major impact incidents. Just 12 months ago, we looked at epidemic, but we never looked at pandemic. So we tend to think about it in terms of what happens if something rages through London and we have to shut down London. We actually hadn't anticipated something as global as coronavirus has done. But even that planning itself has stood us, I think, in reasonably good stead to be able to adapt quickly to the environment we found ourselves in. And one of the first things we did was we locked down probably 2 weeks before the country locked down. So we started most of our staff and planning for that 2 weeks ahead. And our internal data in terms of what we've looked at with personnel show that our peak, if you like, was probably passed before the country went into full lockdown in terms of illness among our staff. So we've been very fortunate from that point of view in terms of spread. But beyond the planning phase, I think there's 3 lenses I would look at in terms of what we think. And in the bank, our rhetoric is very much around customer. So looking at it, what does it mean for our customers? And I think the theme runs through all, and I'll come on to this, but for the customer, it's actually really understanding what the customer needs. And in banking, we talk about customers in vulnerable situations, vulnerable customers. But every single member of society at the moment is vulnerable because we're in a strange environment and nothing is normal. So we're having to adapt, and our banking colleagues are having to adapt to understand what customers are really needing. So one example would be a lot of customers of a particular generation, maybe my generation, are quite resistant to digital banking. You want a personal touch. That has flipped on its head in the last month or two, and actually these customers are now very keen not to have physical contact, and so the digital banking adoption numbers have driven up. So we've had to look at what that means and how do we adapt our services to meet that need. Looking at things like branch opening times, mobile banks, virtual bankers, setting up helplines for vulnerable customers, actually proactively reaching out. So we've had to change a lot of what we do to meet the changing customer need. So it's not just finding new ways of doing what we always did.
And how have you found out about that from them? Have you listened to the customers asking you for particular things?
So we've been running a lot of, we'll go on to this in terms of technology, but data analytics and robotics tools, basically voice analysis of what customers are raising as concerns in telephone calls, but also using, there's a bot that we use called, we call Cora, where a lot of customer queries are dealt with, and that learns as it goes, but it also allows us to analyze where the issues are. But also, reading the press, talking to the politicians, talking to the regulators, you know where the more vulnerable customers are. So you knew that essential workers, whether that's in the healthcare sector or delivery drivers or in supermarkets, they are going to have great pressures on them. You know about the elderly, the vulnerable, and folk suffering with illnesses they're having to isolate. So looking at, trying to anticipate really what some of their needs are. So, this isn't a sales pitch for the bank, but one of the things we developed very quickly was a companion card, which would enable vulnerable customers to have a second card issued on their account, which they could give to a friend or a neighbour, but with quite strict controls around how much could be on it, so that could be used on a contactless basis. Yeah. Contactless is another example industry-wide, where you'll have seen in the UK the contactless limit was increased to £45. Previously 30 in Ireland, it's gone up to €45. So that is really just the stock flow of cash. And I think cash transactions and cash withdrawals have fallen by something like 80%. And we'll probably come on to talk a bit about this, but that's going to change the way society operates, because we are going to be, it's really accelerated digital adoption, but it's really also accelerated this sort of cash-free society.
So as far as your customers are concerned, then the service levels have been maintained? No,
I would love to think they've been maintained. And if I was selling it for the bank, I would say in some areas it's been exceeded. So we have lots of examples of delighted customers who've been very, very pleased that we've proactively reached out to them. We've actively, called them to see if there's anything they need, particularly sort of elderly customers. And from a legal point of view, that creates all sorts of issues around: are you using their data appropriately? Are you helping them? Are you offering them a service, or are you marketing and selling? This isn't a legal seminar, so we won't go into the nuances of that. These type of things keep the team very busy. But other customers have really struggled. So, the press like a bad story, and they will exaggerate, but it is a fact that in the early days, all customers, whether you were retail customers or commercial customers, struggled to get hold of your banks. Some banks had a bigger struggle than others, but lines were being flooded. Folk were looking for help, or a lot of current issues still around things like chargebacks and claims, where flights have been cancelled, holidays have been cancelled, weddings have been cancelled. Yeah. Suppliers are struggling, understandably, with cash flow, so they're offering refunds or delays, but customers want their money back. And if they can't get their money back from a supplier, they come to a bank. So our phone lines have been extremely busy. We try to adapt to that, and obviously the people who man these phone lines, some of them have had to be in self-isolation, some of them have been ill. We've been trying to get them to work from home. We had virtually none of our telephony staff, and there would be thousands of telephony staff dealing with branch queries or with fraud and the like. Having to work from home, we now have 75% of them able to work from home, and that throws up all sorts of questions of security and compliance and monitoring in terms of recording calls. So we had been trying to make that move over time, and we had time plans, I think, that would have taken 6 to 12 months for that to happen. But necessity is the mother of invention, and we've been able to sort of put some of these things in place in a matter of weeks. So things have been improving. We've also used robotics much more so than we did in the past. So when the industry and the regulators announced plans around mortgage payment holidays, for example, we had many thousands of customers phoning in looking to delay their payments. There's a side story to that, because we probably think about 70% of them don't really need to delay their payments, and all they're going to do is end up paying more interest. But there are definitely a cadre of customers who really can't afford it and really need this help. But the lines were being flooded. We had been, I'm not a technologist, but training robotics, actually based out of India, to deal with customer queries for new business. And we've, over about a weekend, repurposed and retrained these bots, so we were able to process calls that were coming in using robotics, not actually natural voice, and get through 8 times the volume with probably 93% better accuracy than we had with human intervention. So we have learned a lot from that, which will benefit us. But it's been really interesting, some of the positives in terms of our business and how we've had to adapt to some of that.
And how have your own lawyers within the bank been involved in that side of things?
So staff lens is the second lens, and the own lawyers particularly. So we've had to adapt to how we do business. So our entire legal function is working from home. So that's from the guys who support financial markets right through to the guys who run internal investigations. And they're now, they're still doing their business. They're interviewing people over Zoom. They're writing the reports, doing everything they can. But fundamental change for everybody. Everybody tended to work from home maybe a day, maybe 2 days every week or 2 weeks, and it was a bit part thing. Now everybody's been at home for 10, 11 weeks. We've been told in the bank that we are not expected, and in fact, we're asked not to come back to the office at least until October. So essential roles and certain regulated roles will go back in, but we're expecting north of 50,000 people to be permanently working from home at least until October, and then it will be revisited. So
that seems to be across the board for lawyers, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah,
moving into a more medium-term plan around that. So what does that mean? Well, because the bank has multi-centred, a lot of the activities we did, we were used to working with others remotely. So we would be running projects where we had colleagues in India, colleagues in London, colleagues in Dublin, colleagues in Edinburgh working together. So there was always an element of that, but you would still tend to find one location would dominate, and you would still have, if there was 12 people in a meeting, 8 of them would be in a room together somewhere. Now everybody is working remotely, and some of the tools like Zoom that we're using today have become incredibly important. Yeah. But actually, what we found is because of the urgency of the situation, people are making decisions faster. So things are getting done faster because they need to get done faster. The expectation is there. And we're almost getting out of the way of ourselves in terms of getting things done. Now that in turn brings issues of risk. So is it a bit gung-ho? How do you control all of that? And we've had to be quite disciplined about maintaining or having our colleagues maintain risk logs and documenting every decision that's made, not the rationale behind it, but so that when we've got a bit of time, we can step back and look at the decisions that have been made and say, right, did we think through that properly? What does that mean? Is that going to cause problems down the line? So it's a different way of working. The bank had moved towards moving agile methodologies over the last 2 years anyway, and that encourages sort of that fast sort of multidisciplinary team type approach, sort of test and learn approach where it's much more incremental. So you minimum viable product delivery rather than sort of trying to present a big bang final solution. This environment actually helps with that because you can test, learn, and in some ways customers are more accommodating of that because they understand that you're just trying to do your best. But also regulators are actually more accommodating, and I have to say, it can be difficult from time to time. The dialogue, I'm not directly with, but I know from the top of the house, with the regulators, with HMT, with the Chancellor's office, is very collaborative and very sort of amenable. I think in maybe 6 to 12 months, once the dust settles and the economy starting to come out and some people are struggling. Hindsight might be a great thing, but it's very collaborative at the moment.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that in terms of the regulators and their attitudes. I mean, certainly at the very beginning, I can recall we were told by the Law Society that, for example, in relation to money laundering, there would be no easygoing approach. We still had to comply entirely with all the obligations. And I presume that from your legal perspective, from your legal team perspective, that's the same. They're still having to keep an eye on all of that.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point. So while I've said there's collaboration on this risk-based approach, money laundering is a prime example. So one of the teams in the bank that I oversee are the legal team that look after financial crime. And by financial crime, I mean what I would call the criminal side, so the anti-money laundering type activity, but also the civil side, so the fraud type stuff. And there is not only is there no let-up on that, but actually there's a heightened risk.
Yeah, well, we'll maybe come on to talk about actual security risks in a moment. And before we move on, just in terms of the working from home ethics, etc., how are your teams managing? I mean, do they have children at home? Are they coping with outside influences, if you like, as well as trying to get their day jobs done?
So I think my teams are doing a fantastic job. They're coping admirably. It's very hard. It's very dangerous to be generic about it. So I tend to think about things in categories. So I think for folk in my generation, certain generations, but actually the reality is that everybody's circumstances are different.
Yeah. And
not only are their circumstances different, but how they react is going to be different because different people have different levels of resilience and pressures on them. So I'm quite fortunate. I've got not too many people in my house. I've got lots of space. I get peace and quiet to work, but I've also got company. I've got a garden. I've got colleagues who are older than me and younger than me who live alone, who are in flats in the centre of cities, who don't really have access. Some of them are vulnerable. Some of them who have friends and family who are quite ill and they can't get to see. So everybody has very different sets of circumstances. Probably the hardest one for most people, aside from the dealing with ill family or deaths in the family, is the people with young kids. I mean, I'm fortunate in that my youngest child is 17, so she claims that she's homeschooling in her bedroom. I
trouble at all then, yeah.
Monday to Friday, so I just have to trust her. But I have a lot of colleagues who've got kids who are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it's not uncommon now to be in quite senior meetings and have small children running in and sitting on knees, and people are being incredibly accommodating and understanding of that sort of thing. And that whole work-life balance, well-being piece is incredibly important. We've just run a pulse survey across the whole bank about 3 weeks ago, focusing particularly on this type of stuff. We just saw some of the results last night, and it's quite interesting how people think about well-being. I'll give you one example we discussed last night. We noticed that more than 50% of the population across the whole bank are saying COVID has had an adverse effect on their mental health and well-being, and that's understandable, and it's differing degrees. But we noticed that that our response rate in Scotland was much more, if you like, negative than in London. And we looked into the narrative of it, and our colleagues in London, while facing similar pressures in many ways, are really enjoying the fact that they're getting to spend more quality time at home with their families because their commuting has been cut. Whereas colleagues in Scotland tend only to have a very brief commute, so they're more focused on some of the downside of spending more time with family, if you like.
Yeah. I can imagine. Well, I wonder, I mean, moving on then to the communication, which I think is what we've been talking to some extent about as to how our teams communicate. And I was wondering how communications between internally with your colleagues as lawyers, but also externally with your supplier firms and firms of solicitors in particular. What have you noticed, or how is that working for the bank?
So I think it's working well, but we're having to adapt. And I think if I was honest, I would say there's almost a tendency to overcompensate for the circumstances. So for me personally, my direct reports, the guys I directly manage and interface with most, one of them is in Edinburgh, 2 of them in London, 1 of them's in Dublin. So I've always been used to dealing with them by Zoom or by audio, although I do not know them quite well and I would travel to see them from time to time. So I'm quite used to doing a lot of meetings the way we're doing this webinar today. What I'm finding is that because there's not any face-to-face stuff, you spend all day staring at a screen, so it's actually quite intense coming back to the well-being piece. But you also have to work harder to keep in touch with people. And it's almost more from the well-being side of things and getting business done, because business will still get done through email or whatever.
Sure.
But it's actually proactively making the effort to get folk together and not talk about work. So a lot of the teams do, 15-minute coffee breaks. Just dial in if you can. The only rule is you can't talk about work type thing.
Right.
So it's not even as sometimes it's as organized as drinks or quizzes, but it's maintaining that human contact is important. And you tend to be very inwardly focused because you look in your own team. I think it's more of a challenge for the law firms because you want to maintain that client relationship piece. And I think a lot of your clients will be so focused on corralling their own teams that they'll probably struggle to make time for you for some of these things. So it's about finding the right balance in the pitch. But what I would say is when you're so inwardly focused, you tend to talk to the same people all of the time. So it is actually quite refreshing to get into a working group or a discussion group where you're seeing some different faces, getting a different perspective. And I think it's a healthy thing. So I think it's quite important actually to make some time. And most people will be reasonably receptive so long as you don't take too much of the time, and you don't necessarily have to be selling them something. It's sometimes just, how's it going? What's your experience? What are you seeing? Can you give me 10 minutes?
Absolutely. Well, we're certainly finding that with clients. I mean, they're certainly dialing into training sessions, etc. But they're also, I think, interested in having, the 10 minutes, having a cup of coffee and chatting about how things are going. Would you say that people are, we've talked about not coming back into the office, say, for quite a number of weeks even yet. Are people keen to come back into the office? Do you think that will be something that we'll look at for the future?
Yeah, I think generally, yes. There are still some people who are very nervous from a vulnerability point of view, and that's perfectly understandable. But I think the world has turned on its head. So we used to have a lot of wrangling and wrestling with folk who wanted to work from home more, and how do you do that? And it all comes down to a question of trust. And the more dinosaurs like myself would really have to get your head around how can you manage, how can you control this? And this environment has been a massive education about how things can be done well, done safely, and done quickly. But you do have to have an element of greater flexibility in terms of timelines. But a lot of people are desperate to come back in because people are fundamentally social. And while I do see changes in working practices in terms of usage of offices and stuff like that, both in the professional life but also personal life, people are still want to have sort of real physical contact, because you can do a certain amount as we can today on a screen. You can see somebody, you can talk to them, you have a perfectly normal conversation around the room, one-to-one. But if you're in a broader context, I don't know if you're like me, but when you're in a larger meeting, when you're not the focus of attention, you can scan the room, you can see how other people are reacting. It's very, very difficult to do that virtually. So we have to learn, I suppose, to adapt some of our people skills.
Absolutely. And from the perspective of a less qualified lawyer, someone who's part of a team and maybe would come to a meeting and not necessarily say anything, is there any tips you would give for our younger lawyers and as to how to, I suppose, make their presence felt as far as the client is concerned?
Yeah, I think it's client and colleague actually, and this, I've done my sort of monthly catch-ups with my 3 trainees in Scotland who I don't manage directly, but I touch base with them at least once a month just to see how they were finding this. And I think historically, back when I was a boy, people were very focused on technical skills, the sort of classic sort of I-shaped lawyer. And then people started in last crash to talk about the T-shaped lawyer and mixing that in with technology and project management. But more recently, a lot of the studies talk about the more rounded lawyer and the human aspects, empathy and interpersonal skills. And I think that's absolutely critical. And on a bad day, I think, well, it must be really tough in this environment to do this because you can't see as many people, you can't get round. But on a good day, I think, well, actually, people are desperate for that contact. So actually, there's an opportunity for folk to reach out. And I've had, I can think of 4 or 5 of the lawyers or the more junior lawyers and other legal teams that I don't really know who've taken this opportunity just to mail me and say, know you're really busy, but would you mind having 5-10 minutes just have a coffee and a chat? And I'm personally quite receptive to that sort of thing.
And we welcome it, absolutely. Yeah.
That balanced way. And I know a lot of my colleagues are, because it's actually quite interesting for me to get a different perspective, to talk to somebody who's maybe 20 or 30 years younger than me about actually how does it feel to you? What do you see? And what can I learn from you? Because a lot of these or the people who are on this call will have a lot of skills and knowledge. People were spared the pain of watching Joyce and I get shown how to operate Zoom before this call started.
Yes.
It would be second instinct to a lot of you guys. So we can learn a lot from that, and there's a lot of tools and things that you use in your personal lives that that can be brought to bear in an office environment, and that whole learning for us, I think, is something we need to be open to. But I also think what we're going through now, almost if it was on much longer, will give an opportunity to reset the way things are done. And I think that creates an opportunity for a different generation who are used to doing things in a different way, who are probably more used to learning digitally, who are used to sharing information in a different way, to teach us how to reinvent sort of how we do business.
Yeah. I suppose thinking about the fact that we communicate in a completely different way, whether it's with customers, with each other as colleagues, or with clients, does that bring with it dangers in terms of security risk, particularly on the financial services side? I mean, we've all read about new scams coming through because of COVID, etc. How is that impacted as far as the bank is concerned?
So, I mean, on the what I call the civil side, the fraud side, which I think is what you're alluding to there, over the last few years, the fraud losses that all the banks have faced have been huge, and some of that is because of the way, it's because fraudsters will always find a new way to scam people. So it's not direct fraud, it's not traditional fraud you saw in a bank where the teller steals money from the till. It's more commonly fraudsters targeting. It's not even vulnerable customers. Sometimes it's quite sophisticated customers, and persuading them to send their money somewhere else, and then that gets into huge disputes. So this whole environment of uncertainty creates huge risk for people, because people will be very nervous about what's happening. So they will be getting the phone calls, or they'll be getting the emails saying, "We need your details for this. We need your details for that. Your money's being presented as a threat." Never give your bank details out to anybody, because a bank will never ask for it. And if in doubt, hang up and phone back in through numbers that you know are secure. But actually, because people are so switched on to it at the moment, actually some of these more recent frauds numbers have fallen.
Interesting.
In the last few weeks. However, we are expecting a bull wave of this, because we know that there's a lot of data gathering going on at the moment, and so we will get hit with society will get hit with a lot of fraudulent activity in coming months. The other thing that we've seen a lot of at the moment is bad actors trying to knock down systems. So denial of service type attacks, but particularly ransomware. So we've seen some of our customers. We've had attempts against the bank that haven't been successful, but we've seen some of our customers who've had ransomware attacks against them. I know of one in the last 10 days, which was in the press, but I know behind the scenes there's been a lot of conversations around how you deal with that. And again, it throws up legal issues for us about, is it legal to pay ransom, that type of thing. And how does that then play into your proceeds of crime obligations?
Absolutely. Well, we like to think that as lawyers we're completely savvy on these things, but interestingly, we're constantly at Brodies, we're being tested by our IT people, who occasionally send us what would be phishing emails just to see if we'll click on them. Yep. And you get either a well done or a very bad if you've done it. So do you think people are more aware of these risks at the moment than they would otherwise be, rather than being more relaxed because of the sort of change of communications?
So I think that's right, Joyce. I think people are more aware because they have more, in some ways they have more time to think about it, but there is this heightened awareness, and this, I mean, paranoia is the wrong word, but just this nervousness about net trust, how safe are, and it falls up a little bit out of the physical insecurity people are feeling around, am I going to catch a disease, how vulnerable, the general sense of vulnerability. So there is that heightened awareness. Yeah. But then, back to what I said earlier around necessity being the mother of invention, necessity also creates this sense of urgency and the need to do things. And that's very much the emotion that a lot of these fraudsters will play on. So, we need to be careful around that. The other thing we've had to watch out for is the more criminality. So we have seen a lot of fairly unusual activity through certain accounts, which purports to go to slightly more dodgy jurisdictions, apparently to buy PPE and things like this. So that, there's a lot of triggers and alerts have been kicked off around that type of thing as well, because of the environment, and also the authorities really trying to throw money at the problem and trying to get things fixed.
course, and certainly we've read in the press about scams with people being invited to apply for government loans, etc., which are not genuine. Have you come across that actually within your own team?
Yes, yeah. So we've had a number of things. So we've observed a massive increase in the number of people trying to open business banking and corporate accounts, because basically they've traditionally been running their business through a personal account, which is not right, and question why our systems haven't picked that up. But they're repositioning it so that they are then eligible to apply for some of these schemes. We've let's see what I can say here. So we introduced technology called confirmation of payee. We can use it as part of that, where if the money's going through the system, it confirms a match. So if anybody banks with RBS from that way, you probably see it on your mobile. And this is an anti-security measure that's come through regulation. Not all the banks have introduced that yet. Other banks have introduced things we haven't, so it's not after competition. But we have made our technology for that available to the authorities so that they can use that when they're paying out on furlough schemes, because we know that scammers are trying to scam the government out of that sort of stuff. So you know, where there's money, there's opportunity for these people to try and do things.
Inevitably. And as between the bank or financial services generally and their suppliers, so for example their solicitors, do you think that the current levels of security that we're using between each other and between us and our clients is going to change if we're going to be working more from home, or do you think that the standards are pretty high at the moment?
I think the standards are high at the moment, and I think they will continue to evolve. But some of them, and I think they'll evolve in a positive way, because some of them are quite clunky at the moment. We use a tool which I know causes all our law firm partners a lot of problems, and causes a lot of our staff problems. If we're sending secret or confidential classified information, we have to use this particular tool, which is very secure, but it means sort of downloading, saving, sharing, even filing, which we and you have obligations to keep, becomes quite difficult. But generally, people are very conscious of it. The increased home working does create risks. You don't know, particularly folk who live in a flat or a shared environment, which is very relevant to the younger population, particularly in the big cities in the UK, but also actually a lot of my colleagues in India. It's very hard to find a private space to work on something, and a lot of what you'll be dealing with is confidential or confidential customer information, and you just don't know who's looking over your shoulder. If you're enabled for home printing, it's easy to stick something in a confidential waste bin in the office. If you stick it in your general waste, all sorts of things can go wrong. So we just need to be acutely conscious of that. But actually, I was going to touch on data security just generally. I think we're at a bit of a tipping point, and you're almost seeing this with the Googles and the Amazons, the Facebooks, and how they use data. You're seeing it in the test and trace, particularly the tracing type debate that's going on around COVID. But to be really effective and to get after COVID and track this down, we need to be probably more open, sharing certain elements of personal data than we were in the past. And I would argue the same for actually delivering effective services to a consumer base. But the flip of that is you need to be super secure around people's data. So if you're entrusted with somebody's data, then you need to be using it for the right purposes. Absolutely. And whether that's a health authority or a bank, that data integrity disclosure, using it properly is very, very important. And I sometimes feel, and if the guys on the call with the writing reply, they could tell me that the younger generation are sometimes too liberal with what they put out there in terms of Facebook and social media. And that type of information is the type of information, back to your fraud conversation, that can be used against people can socially profile you, pretend to be you, and then all sorts of bad things can happen. So the current environment is going to drive a lot of change. China has been very effective in managing down COVID because they have been very intrusive in terms of using their social media to target people and basically put them sort of informally under house arrest and contain it. That would not work in a country like the UK because of our much less totalitarian. But there's some sort of halfway house in terms of social purpose around this.
Sure. We've had a couple of questions in about actual work at the moment, and I know it's something that we're all conscious of as to whether, is a work level going to go up or down. I know certainly as a litigator, we're anticipating that, there is going to be more dispute resolution requiring to be done. One of our participants has asked a question about work levels coming from other organisations as far as you're concerned. Regulators is what they've asked about specifically in government departments, and whether you've seen an increase in the sort of work that you anticipate that firms are going to have to be doing for banks and for regulators, for example.
I think that's inevitable.
Yeah.
We don't even mention Brexit today, and that's still on the cards, and that's going to create work as well. But I won't go there. So in the bank, we've seen a lot with regulators and government departments, really just dialogue. We'd like you to do this. Can you look at that? And a lot of it's industry-led, and it's through UK Finance and things like that. So you're seeing a lot of things coming out in terms of trying to help people, and it's all really well-intentioned, and it's all good. I've not talked much about it because it's not supposed, but my colleagues in the commercial bank have been extremely busy, and there's a number there who pretty much haven't had a day off for about 8-9 weeks. They've been working flat out 2 weekends because every Monday there's a new lending scheme or a lending scheme that needs to be amended. Yeah. So that has created a huge amount of work. When the dust settles, we are in recession. Whether it's a V-shaped or a U-shaped, it will recover. It's just a case of how deep is the scarring going to be. But a lot of companies and a lot of businesses will struggle to come back. Unfortunately, a lot of individual customers are going to suffer as well. When people suffer, they claim. So that is going to create a lot of work. There's going to be litigation. There's going to be disputes, whether it's not just against the bank, but between suppliers in the construction industry. There's going to be a whole load of things going to be worked through. We've been having conversations with the regulators, and actually we've had to take some decisions where we know what we're doing is a breach of the technical regulation, but it's what they want us to do. They want us to do it today, but in 9 months' time, they are not.
You've got the back cover written down, I'm sure. Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of conversation, around that type of thing. So that's going to create a huge amount of work, and there's just going to be a lot of tidying up to do. There's going to be claims. There's going to be financial restructuring, but there's also actually on the upside, there's going to be huge numbers of investment opportunities. There's going to be new, some industries will change fundamentally, but new things are going to come out. I think this is really going to accelerate a lot of environmental and green type products, because we are seeing the benefits to the climate of the reduced travel, reduced commuting, reduced consumption at the moment. I don't know if it's just me, but I'm much more conscious of the birds and the trees this year than I have been for years.
Absolutely.
But it's really going to add momentum to that. So that's going to drive a lot of innovation. You touched earlier on technology. So the way we're using tools and the tools that we use in life, but also in law, is going to change. And I do think it's not necessarily going to get back to the way it was, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. How from a bank's point of view, the services and products that customers need are going to change. But in the legal services environment, because the client's changing, so whether it's a bank or whether it's a high street retailer or an online retailer or a technology company, what they're doing is going to offer to the new world or the new normal. The way you provide your service, the services you provide, the nature of their needs is going to change. I mean, like you, Joyce, I've been around this a long time, and I do think these things go in cycles. And I remember the last crash, the certain teams got very quiet in private practice, and I think at that time a lot of firms stopped their training intakes or cut certain jobs, and I think most of them that I've talked to regretted it, and most of the firms I'm talking to are trying to keep things going at the moment because they know things are going to come back and they don't want to create this lacuna. So while it may feel a bit bleak for some of the younger guys out there, there's a lot of upside here. There's a lot of opportunity, and actually there's a lot of new opportunity because this is such a fundamental thing across the whole of society. It's not just the financial sector that's struggling. I think it will create, a bit of a reset, both in terms of how you work, with the nature of work, and things will come back.
But there are opportunities. I think you're right. I mean, certainly looking at it from a private firm perspective, I mean, we've obviously been looking carefully from Brodies' perspective across our workloads and seeing who's busy, who's not so busy. And it is interesting, we are finding exactly the same pattern as you. There are some people who are incredibly busy, the construction team, etc., disputes, everything of that sort. People are just gearing up for the future. Obviously there are concerns, but as you say, there are opportunities there for investors. And although perhaps people who are doing commercial property type work are concerned, I think looking ahead, these opportunities are going to be work for lawyers in one way or another. So, I mean, certainly speaking personally, I would be encouraging to the young lawyers that they have come into the right profession. There is still going to be work for them. And I think particularly touching on something you were saying earlier about, the rounded lawyer, of course, it's partly about personality and projecting and being the client, being the lawyer that the client wants to have. But it's also a lot about these technical skills, not legal technical skills, but managing a practice and running cases or transactions in a way that is a bit different to perhaps what they would have been able to do even in the office with the technology that was there. Would you agree with that? Is that something that they can see as a positive?
Yeah, no, I very much agree. I mean, I remember one of my first weeks at law school, the deceased Professor Bill Wilson telling everybody that the Scottish lawyer was a man of business more than a lawyer. And I think that sometimes the legal profession have lost sight of that a little bit and have become too technical. And ultimately, you're here to run a business and to facilitate other people's business generally, whether it's their commercial business or the business of their personal life. So I think these rounded, the technical skills are hugely important because you've got to know it and you've got to get it right. But there's a lot of very clever people out there who will know it. And so this USP for focus is actually how do you make yourself relevant? How do you make yourself desirable? How do you deliver a service? And how do you meet your client needs? And whether that's in-house or in private practice, I think the skills are the same. And I think this rounded concept, I think the technology skills are hugely important these days. So yep. I mean, I talk to younger lawyers and I say, look, the more you can learn about how you can use tech will give you an advantage over folk like me. But also project management skills, how you deconstruct, how, we've talked before about using data rooms, how you use tools of robotics to analyze, to do your diligence, to capture information, to run processes over contracts. I mean, I like to talk about it, but I don't really know how to do it. But other people will. But these sort of skills are important. But the rounded people skills around empathizing, about emotional intelligence, understanding what it's not about you, it's about them, and being able to interact with people, and people don't usually remember what you do to them. Somebody once said they remember how you make them feel, and that's sort of that's what sticks. So sometimes somebody who's maybe not technically the strongest lawyer will actually be more successful because they're actually more rounded.
Absolutely, and they are able to project that by making themselves extremely useful in managing how the technology works, but also on the sort of thing we're talking about here, making sure that they are speaking to one another and to the clients so far as they can. We're coming to the end of our time, and I think that the questions which we've had so far have been interesting. There's a final opportunity if anyone wants to get a further question in for Donald. Any final tips, Donald, for you as to going back to what we're saying at the beginning? What should our young lawyers be doing to help themselves upskill or present better in the way that they come across to clients such as the bank?
Well, I think as we're running out of time, first to say I think this is a great thing that Brodies are doing, and the fact that they're opening it up to as wide an audience as possible is to be commended, and to understand why the Law Society have been supporting you in doing that. So well done on you for that. But I think for the audience, it is participating in opportunities not like this, but also more generally. I know some of the younger lawyers and some of my teams have been accessing a lot of the Ivy League law schools in the US are making a lot of their educational content available free. You just have to access it online, and actually for my teams works quite well because it's evening time here and it's daytime there, and you can just sign in and listen to some very smart people talking about not so much the technical aspects of law, but the skills that are relevant in law for technology, for emotional intelligence. And if you just Google search some of that stuff, it's very easy to access. So using, getting that international perspective actually is really important as well. But that type of thing is really good.
Yeah, and making use of what is available if you have got extra time, so that you've got something else to say to either your employer or clients in terms of your usefulness to them.
And then thinking ahead and trying to anticipate what people's challenges and issues will be, and trying to get yourself in a place where you may not know all the answers, but you at least understand or get a better understanding of what the problem is, or help them understand where they're going. So whether that's with your colleagues in your firms or in your in-house teams in terms of where can you help, what can I do, or whether it's for your clients in terms of, okay, you know, we can see these challenges, how might we overcome them, how might we reshape them, and you know, just reading around the subject and trying to be forward-looking, I think is a big step.
Great. Well, that's a very positive note to end on. Thank you, Donald. And thank you very much for your time today. And thank you to everyone for joining us this morning. As I say, do keep an eye on our website. We've got a number of these coming up between now and the middle of August on a variety of different topics with interesting contributors and guests on us. So thank you very much and good morning. Thanks, Donald. Bye.